Good morning to you on this Wednesday after Easter. It's time for some resurrection words of wisdom on the World Wide Web. And so this morning we are in Luke chapter 24. Jesus had walked along the Emmaus Road with a couple of men, and we pick up in verses 31 and 32 where it tells us that they found the 11. These men found the 11 and others who were gathered with them, and they verify that they have seen the risen Jesus. In fact, they said, "It's true, the Lord has risen." And so we actually now zoom in beginning at verse 36. And when these men are all gathered together, Jesus walks in amongst them, and it says that while they were still talking about this, that Jesus himself stood among them and said, "Peace be with you." They were startled and frightened, thinking that he was a ghost. He said to them, "Why are you troubled, and why do doubts rise in your minds? Look at my hands and my feet. It is I, myself. Touch me and see. A ghost does not have flesh and bones, as you see that I have." When he had said this, he showed them his hands and his feet. And while they still did not believe it because of joy and amazement, he asked them, "Do you have anything here to eat?" They gave him a piece of broiled fish, and he took it and ate it in their presence. You know, again, we see where the disciples think that Jesus is a ghost, just like when they were out in the boat in the stormy waters, and Jesus walked out to them on the waters, and they thought he was a ghost, and he reassured them that he was not. Well, here it's kind of a repeat of that, but under a different circumstance. Jesus has risen from the grave, and he comes and he stands among them. And again, they think that he is a ghost. They're startled, they're frightened, they're confused. And he even said to them, "Peace be with you." They must have heard Jesus say that countless times, "Peace be with you." But they're still startled and afraid. And so he asked them, he says, "Why are you troubled? Why did doubts rise in your mind?" And he even asked them, he says, "A ghost doesn't have flesh and bones." And he said, "Look, touch my hands, touch my feet. You can see that it is me." And so then Jesus asks them a question. And in verse 41, okay, it says they still did not believe because of joy and amazement. So they're overjoyed, they're amazed. There's probably a million thoughts and emotions running through their minds. And so Jesus wants to encourage them in their faith and help them believe. And so in verse 41, he asks them a really simple question. He says, "Do you have anything here to eat?" And that question really kind of intrigues me because we know that every single word that Jesus spoke, none of it goes to waste. There was a reason, there was a purpose for everything that he said. And such is the case with this. So, why did Jesus ask them, "Do you have anything here to eat?" Because think about it, they were doubting, they were kind of afraid, they were confused, they were overjoyed, they were amazed. So they're trying to wrap their minds around all this. And what does Jesus do? He asks them, "Do you have anything to eat?" I mean, it's not like he tried to razzle dazzle them with a big fancy theological discussion. He says, "What do you have to eat?" So, it makes you think, well, maybe he was hungry, okay? Because remember, he was back in the flesh, risen from the grave. And so, what did he really mean? What was the purpose of Jesus asking his disciples, "Do you have anything here to eat?" Well, there's a handful of things that we can glean from that. First and foremost, by Jesus asking them that, he wanted to prove his bodily resurrection. Because remember, he said that a ghost does not have flesh and bones. And he said, "Look, here's my flesh. Here I am in the flesh." And he even showed them his hands and said, "Touch my hands, touch my feet." So by taking some nourishment, physically eating something, he's going to prove to them his bodily resurrection. But there are other things that we can glean from and learn about Jesus and what it means to us as well. Because of course we are encouraged and we believe wholeheartedly in his bodily resurrection. So, but there's some other things that we can glean about as well. So, here's another thing perhaps. Jesus had eaten countless meals with the disciples over his 3 years of ministry. And so here, once again, he's doing something that's very familiar to them. He's bringing familiarity into the scene where he's sitting down and he's eating with them. And certainly that must have connected them to all the times they had eaten together with Jesus, heard his voice, heard his laugh, heard as they had sat around over various meals and eaten together. So he uses the factor of familiarity to again reassure his disciples. It is I myself, he said here. But another thing that we see in this is really it's a pretty neat thing. And it's this that Jesus is showing his disciples that he's personable and relatable. And as I said a moment ago, Jesus didn't uh, dump some big theological discussion on them. He didn't chew them out for not believing. He realizes that these men are are struggling in their faith. And so, what does he want to do? He wants to encourage them. He wants to teach them. He wants to show them, and so he does something that's very personable and relatable. He says, do you have something to eat? What do you have here to eat? You know what that really says to me is that it's a very down to earth thing. Jesus is down to earth. Now, he's God, he's the King of Kings, he's the Lord of Lords, but he is very relatable. I mean, as I've said many times, Jesus understands us. He connects with us because not only is he fully God, fully divine, but fully human as well. And he also grew up in a family. He had an earthly family and he experienced family dynamics. He knew how to relate to people. I mean, if we think about all the times that Jesus spoke to people throughout the Gospels, he always knew the perfect thing to say at the perfect time and in the perfect way. So here's his disciples who are still shallow in their faith and struggling. And instead of blasting them with a lesson, he sits down and he does something very personable and relatable, very down to earth with them. He sits down and he eats with them. You see, what that says to us is that Jesus knows how to connect with people. He knows how to connect with people just like he did there, he does today. And he's setting the example for us of how we can connect with people. When we first of all, we need to remember that when we may be struggling in our faith, we may be questioning something, we may be going through something that's uncertain. Jesus comes to us in a very personable, compassionate, relatable, merciful way to teach us, to lead us, to shepherd us, to strengthen our faith, just as he did the disciples. But then he passes that baton to us in that that is how he wants us to connect with other people, to be relatable, to be personable, to be down to earth, to be yes, focused on Jesus and his mission and scriptural truth, but to connect with people in a way that we come alongside of them and encourage them, especially people who may be struggling in their faith. So Jesus is giving us a great lesson here on how we can effectively connect with other people. And then kind of coming off of that, we see another thought here. And this is again, Jesus says, what do you have here to eat? We see that Jesus is building their faith with something very common, an everyday thing, and that's food. In fact, if we think about it, there are three times after the resurrection that Jesus ate with his disciples, or ate with people who he showed that he was indeed alive. Again, in Luke chapter 24, the men on the Emmaus Road, he sat and he broke bread with them. And when he did that, they realized it was him. And then here in verse 41 and in those surrounding verses, Jesus is eating with them again. And then if we were to bounce over to John chapter 21, we would see that Jesus cooked them breakfast on the seashore after the resurrection. So three times Jesus uses a very common thing and something that we all need and we all enjoy doing, that's eating food. he uses that to connect and help build their faith, to connect with them. And so, what does that say to us? Well, it isn't saying that food is the most important thing, because it's not. We know that Jesus said, man does not live on bread alone, but on every word that comes from the mouth of God. But what it is showing us is that daily sustenance, daily nourishment that we need, it's a great way to connect with people. Maybe perhaps Jesus is showing us by his example here that one of the ways that we can connect with people and in an encouraging way and in a non-threatening way is to break some bread with them. Maybe invite someone to go out for a cup of coffee or a bit of lunch, or maybe to have somebody come visit us and share a sandwich with them or something like that. Have somebody for supper or for a meal. Whatever the case may be, there's a lot of ways that that can be done. But again, we're seeing that Jesus is connecting with his disciples here in a very practical way to encourage them. And through this, he's setting us several examples of how and why we can do that as well. So again, it just kind of is an amazing thing to me that here is Christ, victory over sin, victory over grave, victory over evil and death, the risen King of Kings. And what does he do with his disciples to encourage them in their faith? In this instance, he says, do you have anything here to eat? And he used that to sit with his disciples and to teach them and to encourage them. That's our Jesus, caring, loving, merciful, compassionate. And yes, he sets an example for us of how in everyday ways we can connect with people and encourage them in the faith, help them to get to know Jesus better. You know, it doesn't sound like a real theological things. And yes, there are times where we sit with people and we help them understand the scriptures. We share Bible verses with them. We pray with them. We teach them theological things. And that's not to say those things aren't important. They really are. But really what we see here is a pattern for an effective way that maybe we can connect with people to do those things on a deeper theological level. So consider Jesus' example, consider Jesus' words here, and then maybe perhaps pray about how Jesus might be leading you to connect with somebody in a very practical way. Again, maybe over a cup of coffee or lunch someplace, to encourage them in their faith and help them get to know Jesus better. This is Pastor George praying that God's word makes a great difference in your life today.